Today I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what is appropriate to comment on during peer review and what do you want to look for, and also kind of the opposite of that, which is what do you not comment on during peer review or what should you avoid focusing on? So the first thing that I want to talk about is the things that you do want to look for during peer review. Peer review happens typically during the revision process. That means that you're looking for bigger issues in the essay, content issues typically. So things to look for: thesis statement. Is it clear? Is it specific? Does the rest of the essay relate back to the thesis? Looking at the paragraphs. Does each paragraph have a main point? Is that main point clear? Does the reader support their main point? Offer some sort of evidence or specific details, examples to illustrate whatever it is that they're trying to show? With the paragraphs, are they logically organized? Does it make sense to have the first body paragraph first, or should it come later in the essay? Looking for any information in the paragraphs that seems unnecessary or off topic. Any part of the essay that becomes unfocused is an issue that's going to address and deal with clarity later on. It's going to impact the overall understanding of what a reader can take away from your essay. Other things to pay attention to. Overall tone, right? If something seems that it could be offensive to an audience or unclear to an audience, then that's always something that you can point out. Is there a hook? Does the essay have sort of that clear introduction where it leads you in a specific direction? Or do you read the introduction and kind of feel like you're a little lost and not sure where you're headed? As a reader, you shouldn't feel lost. So that's something you can look for during peer review. Any point really within the essay where you get lost, you don't know what the reader is trying to say or where the essay is headed. You shouldn't have to guess as a reader. And then of course, leading up to that conclusion, is it clear that the essay's finished, right? Does it sound like it's done? Does the last statement pull everything together? Does the conclusion have some purpose to it, or does it just sound like it summarized everything else that was said? Conclusions should have some purpose to it. Other things to pay attention to that you can look for is flow, right? If there's areas of the essay that seem really, really choppy or seem disconnected, that's very helpful to point out during the revision stage. Anything within the essay that seems like it's not staying focused on the essay prompt. So the prompt question is always really, really important, and the whole essay needs to address that. So maybe half the essay addresses the prompt, but the other half goes off topic. Well, that would be something that you'd really want to point out. Of course, any aspect of the essay that hasn't yet met minimum requirements for the directions, drafts don't have to. It's still helpful to point those out though. Constant reminder of what you need to do in the draft. And then just in general, anything that sounds awkward, confusing, any point where you feel a little bit unclear about what the person's trying to say, that can be really helpful to point out. Any place in the essay where you feel the writer should just be more specific, right? Whether it's more specific in their thesis, more specific in their choice of the words they're using, more specific in regards to the details that they're including. There's almost always an area that can be more specific, and specificity is the easiest way to make your essay stronger. So to comment on that in each other's drafts, really a helpful part of peer review. Now, things you want to stay away from. It's kind of the opposite of all those big things. You want to stay away from editing. Editing issues are something that happens after the revision process. It happens later on, and it's not something that you're typically going to comment on with each other in the class because no one in our class is a grammar expert. If you're a grammar expert, you probably wouldn't be taking this level of English. It takes a lot of years to really grasp grammar. I've studied it over and over and over, and occasionally there are still rules that come up where I'm like, what is the correct answer to that? Because of that, it's not fair for you to comment on someone else's grammar because you may not know the rule as well as you think you do. Or it may be more of a stylistic choice where you just think stylistically it sounds better one way, but the way that the original author had it was also correct. So it's just not something that we comment on. There are other ways to get help with grammar: the Little Seagull Handbook, the grammar practices we do during class, links to websites. There's other places for that, but peer review is not the time for it. Again, Stay away from commenting on things like trying to fix someone's sentence structure or putting periods and commas where they belong or capitalization. That's on the author to figure that out. That's not on someone during peer review, okay? You're not their personal editor, so don't edit for someone else. Also, it's an issue of authenticity. As a writer, I don't want someone coming in and changing my sentence structure and my word choice, because what will happen is then the essay or piece of writing is going to sound more like the peer reviewer and not like the authentic author that wrote it. And you want your style and your voice to be priority and center in your writing. You don't want it to start sounding like someone else. So for those reasons, don't focus on the grammar. Grammar is a small portion of what makes an essay strong. It is not the bigger concern, and it is definitely not what you should be focusing on with an early draft. So please stay away from that. Now, having said that, if you notice that there's like a repetitive issue that you notice over and over and over, and you're really confident that it's a problem, maybe something like using a lot of texting language, for instance. Well, you could point out one example of where someone uses texting language and then just make a note to them like, hey, I noticed this was something that happened throughout your essay. You may want to edit closely for it later. That's fine. That's perfectly helpful to point out some repetitive pattern, but it's not okay to go through and correct or fix someone else's writing for them. That again, that's something that we don't do in the class. You're not paid editors. I'm not a paid editor. That is not what we're focusing on in here. We're going to focus on the content and what you're saying and how you're saying it versus if you have a perfectly correct comma or if you spelled one word incorrect, okay? Little errors are not going to be the big focus. So again, during peer review, we're going to focus on those big issues. Make sure that it's the things that are content related, that is going to impact the overall quality of the essay more often than not. And that is what you really want to comment on. Excuse me. Keep in mind also that during peer review, even a strong draft can be stronger. There is always a way to improve writing, no matter what level the writer is at. So even if you get a really strong draft, always step back and be like, okay, how could this be even better than it is right now? There is no such thing as a perfect essay. So how could it be improved? How could this be even more fantastic than maybe what it already is? Opposite of that, you get a draft that maybe is a little bit more difficult, where there's still a lot of work to do. It's a rough draft. That's fine. You can have lots of work to do in a rough draft. They're not meant to be perfect, right? But don't focus on every single little thing. Comment on the areas that you think is going to impact the essay the most. So for instance, if I know that an essay isn't following the directions, that's something I'm going to point out right away. If I notice it's really disconnected or lacking some sort of central idea, thesis statement to hold it all together, those are things that are immediately going to impact the overall quality of an essay and can immediately make an essay that could have been strong really weak. So always think about that as far as terms of what are the higher order concerns that the essay or the draft has. Focus on commenting on those, and that's going to give you the most benefits from peer review. Also helps you think about what you want to do in your own writing and maybe avoid in your own writing, okay? So this is just some tips. Want to make sure peer review is as helpful as possible for everyone. It can be a great benefit and a great tool. Any questions about peer review, of course, always ask. Don't hesitate. There is no stupid questions. And good luck.